Well, thank you, everyone. Really, truly honoured for you to join me today's webinar, Voice Technology in a Compliance-Led World. We will have an ability for you to provide some questions throughout this webinar. So if you have, within the web tools that you have, you'll have an ability to drop questions. Please do, and I'll cover those a little bit more. My name is Tom Rimmer. I'm part of the Speechmatics team here. My career in the last 20 years has given me a fortunate opportunity to work with many different organisations in many different industry sectors. Primarily, it's been around the capture, preservation and discovery of valuable corporate data. I work with companies to ensure that the preservation of records and the ability to produce them quickly and accurately for regulators, for subject matter requests, internal investigations, or potential litigations. We always used to call that approach from cradle to court. So from the time data is created to the time you may need it and stand with you in court, we look after that data. I've had the great honour and fortune to work with large to global tobacco manufacturers around their requirements around legal hold and proactive legal hold and discovery requirements. I was involved in one of the biggest e-discovery review platforms with class action settlements in the billions of dollars for the Deepwater Horizon incident. But a large proportion of my 20 years or career of 20 years plus, I've worked with the largest financial institutions globally to address their record keeping obligations around their compliance, their monitoring and surveillance, and within their internal e-discovery teams. So I've had some fun and games. I've worked in around things like rogue traders and investigations there, or looking at the data there. I've worked obviously the subprime and banking crisis that was there, Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme, LIBOR, you name it. I've had a few incidents and scars of helping organisations around those. Throughout my time, the obligation around record types has grown. You know, from the days where it was reporting on transactions and looking at transactions and the reportings, to actually the requirements around e-coms and the emails and the chat, which are already text-based and easy to, fairly easy to analyse and understand, and social media, etc. But one of the most challenging types has always been, has been in discussions that I've had over the years, is voice. The ability to understand what has said and get valuable insights. What we say and how we say it in terms of tone, sentiment, the variety of accents, even my British Southwest twang, background noise, traders that have large amounts of noise or call centres behind. It's been a challenge for technology to really deliver that real insights into what's been said. But it was one of the reasons I joined Speechmatics. They have a very exciting and capabilities in their engine and what they can do. So it was a challenge I grasped at. So very briefly, just to give you a quick insight into Speechmatics before we get into the real content. Speechmatics is at the forefront of these types of discussions, no doubt. Speechmatics powers applications that are mission critical, need accurate speech recognition through its any context speech recognition engine. Its engine powers and is the platform under multiple solutions that are in contact centers, as you can imagine, with large call centers, CRM solutions, consumer electronics, large amount within defense and security, as you can imagine, listening to those. And really a lot of our early days, we were with the media and entertainment world around subtitles and understanding what was said. But one of the key areas that we've seen huge amount of growth in of recent is the world of compliance and e-discovery. The ability to understand what has been said, manage it based on policies and good corporate governance, and then if required to actually discover over it and even discover where certain things are said within a recording has become an important aspect. We're working with companies, some of the largest e-discovery vendors out there in the world, to allow their technology to use ours. We're working with providers that can really look at managing voice files over its life cycle based on what is said, and then also looking at monitoring and surveillance, making sure you can alert on maybe certain policy infringements or or prompting. Now, Speechmatics processes millions of hours of transcription worldwide every month. We support over 30+ languages. We've got flexible deployment, so we can put this on site within a premise, or we can put it into the cloud. So it's the capabilities, and this has been done through pioneering development. You know, our founder, Tony Robertson, who pioneered the way of automating speech recognition, to the multiple PhDs that sit within our organization that are still leading us at the top end of the innovation around this technology. You know, the neural networks, which considers the acoustics, the language, the dialects, the multiple speakers, the punctuation, all of these mean that Speechmatics is a leading provider in this area. So hopefully that gives us a good understanding of why we're having these conversations. So the webinar really is to cover a few of these discussions we're having around the world of unstructured voice data, and then overlaying on top of that the regulatory requirements and compliance and governance, risk and compliance, GRC, that we see that challenge many organizations, not just financial institutions, but also to address, you know, many organizations and their good corporate governance. So what we intend to cover is the challenges, what challenges business face with voice data, what are the challenges with voice data for regulatory compliance, and then one question that we come across a lot is regulatory technology is overtaking, or is it a much bigger part of financial technology? And we'll go into some of those. Now, I know this webinar, you won't want to listen to my dulcet tones for an hour. So what I've asked is a friend, a longtime friend, an ex-colleague, and a partner actually of Speechmatics, George Tahanas from Soho Squared, to join me halfway through this to give us an overview and his thoughts and his insights and expertise. So we intend to hopefully get lots of questions for you that George and I can field. So please, as I said at the start, please send us your questions, put them into the question and answers box, and we will do our best to answer them. If we can't answer them in this session, we will come back to you. Right, so voice is still used. I'm obviously using ours in this webinar, but voice is still one of the most used forms of communication and continues to be in our working lives. I appreciate lots of people have used emails and chat to very quickly send messages, but still that ability to speak to your clients, speak to employees, look at them face to face on video calls, etc. You know, there are meetings now, it's not just about picking up the phone. You know, the meetings that you have internally or externally, tools such as Blue Jeans, Teams, Skype, Zoom, and this webinar technology are all scenarios that are using the voice and the video. But how many of those are recorded? So we're recording this session now. Now, once it's recorded, do you then have requirements around keeping it as a record? How do you manage it over a record? And what is said in this recording to make sure that you manage it through its retention period in a correct way? You know, ACOMS, or visual comms, has been a key part of companies' updates, their training. You know, like I imagine, like ourselves, our training comes on videos these days to really make sure we understanding companies' policies. It is general business practices put into recording these days, so it's part of everyone's working life. And never has it been so vital in the challenges that we faced this year with the pandemic, where the only option was to communicate. Businesses had to communicate remotely. Moving the capabilities of audio remotely so people can work remotely has been key, and it's been a key challenge for large organizations out there. But it's not just moving that capability out there, it's how do you ensure that you're complying with policies, that you are looking at the regulation and engaging on those with what is said. You know, I myself felt the need to speak to customers and partners to keep that sense of reality, to keep that connection with them, because I wasn't able to see them. So a lot of that was recorded, and you know, asked if they were happy for recordings, so I can actually provide those as our notes from the meeting. So much easier to look at a voice recording and have something transcribed rather than writing copious notes. one of our banking clients confirmed that voice calls to their call center increased by 25% during the COVID months. And that wasn't just the challenge of the growth in the number of calls. The challenge they had is the number of call center agents they had, because ability to move them remotely, the ability where some were actually ill or just weren't able to get the technology. So they had a higher volume of calls, but the less number of call agents. The ability to understand what they were calling for, to be able to use resources intelligently was key to these. So understanding what was said in those interactions was key and vital. I think also that there was a significant amount of company senior executives communicating not just internally, but externally. You saw that they were having to be reassured their employees, their customers, but also their investors, that they're managing their business through this crisis and how they were going to do that. A lot of those interactions were all through audio or video capabilities. And again, looking at what was happening and giving the right advice, how do you manage that as a record? Would you need to discover over it later? Was key discussions that we've had with organizations. And it's not just the corporate world. You've got the governments and public offices that provided insight and advice. So yeah, how can you know, it's so important to be able to understand what is said and how you manage that through its life cycle. But speech contains a level of depth, complexity and breadth that other channels such as databases, who have rows and columns, is it in a plus, is it in a minus, is it a red, is it a green? Those you can control. You have those abilities to understand them. Email and chat, very similar, it's text-based. The ability to put analytical tools across them has been done and has shown advances in where you can go to automatically understand certain emails, categorize them, certain chats, report against them, monitor and surveillance. But conversations only lasting a few minutes include hundreds of words, phrases, sentiments. There's different tones, potentially critical themes and multiple themes that can be very relevant to maybe compliance or legal issues. An example that we've got here on the right-hand side. Thank you, airline, for sending my luggage to the sunshine because it's raining where I am. Now, a lot of the words in that you can see as being positive, and I may have said that in a positive tone, but hopefully it could be seen as British sarcasm, basically saying to the airline, well, you sent my luggage somewhere else, which is not very helpful. If you look at a different tone, if I went, thank you, airline, for sending my luggage to the sunshine because I'm in the rain, again, it's a negative tone. How can you take what's spoken? How can you look at tone and pitch and really understand that customer experience, understand what your customer is going through? From our point of view, we work with many partners and technology providers that can give you that level of analytics on voice, and they use the ASR as a platform to build on top of other capabilities. Now, historically, if we look at ASR technology, that it's not rare that the ability to capture and record voice recordings has been done and has been a practice for many years. Commonly, it's been undertaken by a specific skill set, people that understand, and services and skills that understand telephony, PBX, voice over IP, etc. However, you've got additional voice communication. So how do you capture the calls from Teams? How do you capture the web content and manage those through its life cycle? How do you capture applications? Number of calls that go through WhatsApp, for example. Now, obviously, all organizations have looked to control this through people process technology, but sometimes it's a policy to say you can't use these technologies. But how can you stop that? So a lot of those organizations, the challenge around capturing and controlling has been the headache. But I believe a lot of organizations are getting through that. They understand how they capture, they understand how to bring these together. But then it comes to actually saying, well, how do we understand the information? And a lot of the onus on understanding the information was tags by agents. So call agents would tag, this call was about a mortgage, this call was a bank card. But you are then putting the onus on that agent to tag correctly. and unfortunately, us humans can be full of errors. But then what you look at is how can you make sure many questions to help you get to that same place. But again, you're managing the information a lot of the time on metadata and how accurate and how concise and clear is the information in there, because there's also pressures on answering more calls and engaging with more clients. So it's that balance of having enough information to be able to get value from it. Now, ASR technology is not new either. So ASR has been out there, automatic speech recognition has been out there for years. But what we used to find, and I had many conversations with clients many years ago, and they used to say to me, it was a very hungry, resource-hungry application. I will need farms of servers to be able to process the amounts of volumes of recordings that I have out there. I think one even said that they'd need a small power station to power the amount. I think that's changed. I definitely think that's changed. The level of architecture and the change in the architecture, the ability to now manage the compute resources that are required is definitely something that has changed in the industry and changed in the technology to be able to now look at the ability to use ASR. I suppose then the challenge with ASR is if you can capture and transcribe, is what's the quality? Is the value of transcribing valuable to us? But if you're not getting the level of accuracy due to the quality of audio, maybe the background noise of traders, the background noise, or specific jargon and terms, and then you've got things like the multiple different accents or the multiple different languages that people are using and the constant barrage that they're using. So it was very difficult to get the accuracy. And maybe some on this call will agree, but we used to see accuracy levels between kind of 40 and 60%. So on average, half of the call you couldn't understand. So you weren't getting the value. So therefore, the investment in these types of technology wasn't delivering the value. And again, I think to say that the architecture and the capabilities around that has changed. No more has seen that with Speechmatics and what we've done and the growth in our organization. So just talking about pure world accuracy itself, here is some independent testing that has been done. As you see, I've just put an example on here for English, French, and Dutch. And as you can see from the colors in the bar there, the lower you are, the better. So hopefully I'm showing you here Speechmatics in a glowing report where we have some great results from the testing. So commonly the mechanism used to measure is word error rate, abbreviated to WER. So the higher the number, the more mistakes you have made in relation to this reference. So out of 100 words, if you look at English, 12.9 of those words would be wrong. So again, we're still getting a huge amount of good, accurate transcription there. Now, granted, this really does come down to use case. It comes down to the quality of that audio. So we're giving you some examples here. But one of the things we always push for is let's test, let's show you, let's look at your scenarios, and let's look at that rate that you can get. But I think what's also really important is it accuracy you're after, or is it the benefit that you get from it, the outcomes, the insights? An example there, we've recently been part of a proof of concept for a large European bank. They were looking at their call center. Now, when we did the testing, it was around a certain language. When we did the testing, we came back with around about 83% accuracy, which again was a great result compared to where they were. I think 83, 86% accuracy, which was great. However, when we actually looked at the purpose of the call reasoning, we actually got a higher number. We were into the 90s, 90%. And the reason for that is the key terms that we were able to transcribe. We were able to identify the call was about a mortgage. We were able to identify it was about a bank card. And therefore, the organization itself knew that they could either point the client to online digital environments where they can say, you can order this on your app, or they can direct them to a certain call person, or looking at the reports that they really wanted to understand where all these calls are coming from and how they can understand their business more. So a lot of the time, I don't think it's just accuracy. It is about the understanding of what's the reason. And there's key reasons we do well in that. So you've got to look at things like punctuation, look at the sentiments, look at the audio type, the language ID, the speaker, diarization, when people go silent. So using the platform, using ASR platforms together with partners that we have, and George will go on to say this, abilities to actually look at that sentiment and the speakers and analyze it, that's where it's really starting to get true value. And that's where our partners are really finding great value that they're having with their clients. So we've looked at why voice is important and it's growing. We've looked at what the technology was like and what it could be. But let's look at this in the industry and looking at it from a governance and compliance point of view. If you look at, for example, the financial sector, and you look at regulators in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority, and looking at things such as COBS 11.8, who oblige firms to retain records of specific conversations, telephone conversations, and electronic conversations for client orders, reception, transmission, the execution of those orders. Even if that order wasn't completed, you still need to keep it for a record for a period of time. And that's not just the only regulator. There are many regulators, MiFID II, SEC 17.4A, etc. There are multiple regulations out there all around communication, your compliance controls and compliance reporting against them. Ensuring policies are in place, providing the training to those people and rules. These are all important topics that are at board level. Have we got the capabilities in place to manage our policies to ensure we're doing good corporate governance? Trusting your employees to do the right thing is at the heart of every company, organization, I believe. And proving to the regulators that they're doing a good job is something that is part of key objective. Providing those guardrails to ensure that the policies and the governance and the interpretation of the law that each company has done is key. And technology to demonstrate that good corporate governance is required. If you see the volume and velocity of data that's been created, the only way to address governance, risk, and compliance is to utilize technology. If you look at these slides here, it's estimated that the GRC technology market in 2024 will be almost $50 billion. 1/3 of spending, KPMG have confirmed, is going to be regulatory technology. So there are many, many areas where this is a vital importance and investment is put there. One of the conversation themes that we have with executives at the moment is lines of defense within organizations. So if we look at these and some of the conversations that we have, if you look at those different lines of defense, where voice and where ASR and analytic technology can be really strong. For example, on the first line, where you've got frontline staff, traders, call agents, etc. When they look at key themes such as customer onboarding, such as anti-money laundering, such as know your customer activity, there are key requirements within those to ensure that you cover your compliance and policies. Am I getting the right evidence there for these policies? Have I asked the right questions? How can you enable your end users or those frontline staff to make sure that they're asking these, to make sure that they've requested those? A lot of the time they're put in scripts, and a lot of the time the agents are ticking a button to say they've answered that. But could you automatically help them? There's technologies out there that allow you to actually provide that quality assurance, to allow you to do the prompting, provide information directly to the client without that frontline staff touching a button. The ability to allow supervisors to escalate certain calls. Maybe the call isn't going well. You can escalate supervisors to join that call and provide input. So right at the front line, technology like ASR and capabilities can help organizations. If you then look at the second line of defense, which again is vital, large amount of financial institutions have large growing compliance teams. It's one of the headaches for compliance, heads of compliance, is how can I manage my ever-growing amount of volume of data that I have, the ever-growing amount of alerts that are happening? How can I reduce that? And again, I suppose what we look upon there is you look at the capabilities that you can monitor and do surveillance on the textual word, you know, the transactions that are happening, what transactions are happening that may need to be looked at. Can I look at the communication by email, by chat? Is there information that's being released too early? Has someone released a product when they shouldn't have? So these are all really good from a textual point of view. How do you manage that with those conversations that maybe traders are having, conversations that people are having that really they shouldn't be having with certain organizations, or they're too early? How can you identify maybe those infringements? And it may be misadventure. They didn't know they shouldn't have. How can you understand them? In the past, where it comes to the audio side of things, a lot of the time it was done post-event. They could see a transaction happen, they can maybe see some emails, and then they would look at voice and they would investigate. But by that time, something's happened. The other area is looking at random sampling. So a lot of organizations would take a percentage of calls, listen to those to understand if they were part of an infringement. Now, again, the volume of calls that go up, the amount of calls, the percentage that you have to listen to, is that growing? Is there too many calls? Does that mean more compliance staff are required? Is there any way to look at technology to help you with that? And that's one of the areas that we see a big growth in, is how can you help those? Now, one of my questions for George shortly, and I will get to him, is we will ask about proportionality. And obviously with regulations and compliance, is how proportionality on different transactions and services and activities may be able to manage that better. The final third line is around making sure a independent audit team working with regulators to look at the policies and the processes and the technology in place to ensure that it keeps in line with what you're trying to achieve with those policies. I know from regulators, they then start to understand the impact in businesses and therefore look at how these regulations can be better managed. But if you don't manage these regulations and the compliance that we've all seen, and these are widely reported out in the press, some of the results for this. You know, if you look at some of these AML, anti-money laundering and sanctions breach there, if you look at misreporting, anti-competitive antics, etc., the fines are significant. However, I don't know if it's just the fines. Just as important is your brand and your IP, and therefore no financial organizations wants to find themselves on the front of the news feeds, the financial news feeds, for doing something wrong. They want to show that they're good corporate governance. And again, that's where we're seeing a huge change. The amount that organizations, financial organizations, are investing to ensure that they do have good corporate governance, they do comply to policies. Conduct of business is a key factor in all of these organizations, and therefore large amounts of investment are being put into these. For example, here in the US banks, estimated that they will spend over $1 billion this year in compliance. Accenture sees that nearly a 90% increase in compliance investment over the next 2 years. So it's definitely a big area. 10% of revenue of European banks by 2022 will be in the compliance area. And I think this one is really an interesting fact, that 300+ million pages of regulatory documents will be published this year. So there's huge amount of information about the compliance and regulatory world. There's a huge amount of information and noise and key documents about how regulations and interpretation of those regulations. So it's really important that we are looking at these regulations and organizations taking those seriously. And this is where I suppose the world of regulatory technology has definitely grown. We were very honoured, and I was part of the team that was honoured to be part of a very large European bank's FinTech program this year. And the number of regulatory solutions as part of that vendor selection process was significant. You know, the innovation is still at the heart of many of these banks, and driving forward a digital platform, digital transformation is key to a lot of these banks, not just the new digital banks that have come up, but these historic banks that are changing and transforming. So it's just as important that as you innovate, they all take a scenario and they understand the obligations that they have around compliance and policies, not just privacy laws with GDPR or CCPA, etc. It's looking at other reporting obligations they may have for them. So they get great, you know, organizations who are using regulatory technology to get greater insights into their most valuable assets, which is their clients and their data. You know, I think we were looking at a large amount of CEOs see that if you get the strategy correct, this then provides a strong economic incentive for more efficient reporting and compliance systems to better control and reduce compliance costs. So organizations are looking at these banks, financial institutions, all organizations are looking at these tools, looking at how can I better provide a platform to my organization. So we've gone through a few challenges there. We've looked at how the understanding of voice and the interaction, the valuable insights that ASR can deliver. You know, proactively helping financial institution staff, looking at their workflow, prompting them, have you looked at this? Providing information in real time. So one of the keys here is you can look at these conversations and in real time understand what's being said and then take action for it. That's something that's being done now and its capabilities out there. Alerting frontline staff as well. Has there been an infringement? Again, those alerts, it may be misadventure, but you can actually help them. And then if you're looking at reducing those number of alerts, there are big values in those. But again, another part of all of this is understanding customer journey, understanding transactions and capabilities, the emotions, the sentiments, to better run your business, better improve that engagement with your clients, provide strategic reporting of where your investment should be. And the ability to search over that. Unfortunately, as we see, if you have regulatory, you see the fines, the ability at the other end is you need to search over that information. How do you search over voice recordings? Do you just look at what Tom has said to George on this date to that date and then listen to thousands of hours or hundreds of hours of recordings? Or can you search and actually find maybe that smoking gun or find the element of where that conversation was and be prepared to provide that to an investigator, a regulator, etc. So these are all key areas that we see that voice and the ability to manage voice and deliver that is of great importance to many organizations. Well, I've spoken enough, as you all basically say, but what I'd like to do now is introduce, as I said, an ex-colleague, a long-term friend and a partner of Speechmatics. I'd like to introduce George Tahanas, and I'd like to get George, I'd like to thank you for spending time with us today. George, are you there?
I'm here. How are you, Tom?
I'm very well, thank you, George. Thank you for hanging on and listening to me ramble.
All good.
But what I'd like to ask you, George, is I'd like to see if you can just do a quick overview of yourself and also of your company, and really, you know, go into the backgrounds of the types of conversations that you get involved in.
Great. Right. So a bit like Tom, I've spent actually quite a bit of time in the compliance and regulatory world, surveillance and investigation, along with ediscovery. Worked extensively with the large money center banks and other regulated entities, and really around problems that have been discussed, which is how do you take large sets of books and records that entities are obligated to keep, make sense of them, and then put practices and technologies in place that allow them to manage against those obligations find information when they need it, and adhere to the obligations that they have. What we did a couple of years ago is started a company called Soho Squared, and we're focused really around information risk and information insight, taking huge amounts of information and really the ability to manage the risk while also finding ways to drive insight from all of this information that's being generated across all these different channels. And we work with large financial services companies, insurance companies, and some of what we do is very focused on the risk side of the equation. Other times it's very focused on the insight and analytics, but more and more it's a little bit of both. And it's the ability to really deliver against both of those and using really the latest technologies to make all of that work. What we have built, then we saw an opportunity and really a need around audio. Obviously, technology has been out there for a long time to both record and try and do some level of ASR and analysis of audio, but the reality is a lot of it's not been very good. And we saw this opportunity emerging even prior to COVID, where just the sheer volume of virtual interactions, call center interactions, teaming and collaboration systems was generating a large amount of information that's going to be really audio driven and spoken words. And we also identified one other key element, which is the technologies that were coming out of the cloud vendors like a Google or an Amazon, which are very good at what they do, are really targeted though at non-conversation related content. And so we knew that those technologies would not be really targeted to the kinds of communication we were focused on in enterprises, aside from the fact that you don't have complete control over where you want to deploy things. Those models really aren't designed around conversational speech. It's really more command-driven speech. An intelligent speaker, turn on the lights, turn on some music. Those are very different than a long-form piece of communication. So we spent a lot of time in working and looking through different technologies and found the Speechmatics platform to be the absolute best ASR platform for us, not just the models and everything that goes into building their models, but more importantly, also the ability to deploy and deliver wherever we need. And so we've built a platform around that, which does all of the things that Tom has been describing, which is the ability to derive sentiment. We run all kinds of NLP and NER algorithms that help us derive it both really at the point of processing and in real time or in batch, parts of speech, intent, concepts, things like that actually form an understanding of what's actually being said and not purely a transcription.
Well, that's great, George. So, George, do you mind if I pick your brain a little bit further here and just ask you, what do you see kind of some of the key themes that you are hearing from executives in the industry right now around compliance?
Right, some of the same challenges we've always heard, right? In the sense that I have a ton of information, I'm communicating a lot of different ways in a lot of different channels. Audio is coming up more, again, because of the virtual nature of how teams are collaborating and how our work environment is obviously much more virtual than it ever used to be. Actually posted on my LinkedIn yesterday or the day before a study that's in HBR was actually conducted by Microsoft, which is what does the new workplace look like, and the level of virtual meetings, online meetings, and then obviously the amount of outreach that's going through, as you pointed out, into call centers and contact centers that are obviously conversational and spoken words that need to be managed and understood.
Yeah, so and looking at those, are people understanding that or organizations understanding that, looking at their voice, looking at maybe the historic voice, but going forward, it's looking at these voice files, they're starting to see the value of them. They're not as much of a headache as I described that they were previously.
Well, sure. And so, again, and you look at contact center, call center use cases, they have both the compliance element often and the insight element, which is you really want to understand people are contacting call center, they've already then probably exhausted a number of other avenues, right? And so understanding why they're contacting a call center or an advisor is pretty important, and deriving those insights is critical, and you can do that obviously in the audio channels now, as well as then managing the risks that's associated with those conversations, or that might be applicable in a financial advisor or trading environment, whatever it might be. The other thing that we've been doing though, and how we've built the application, is we actually are doing all of the really interesting things around sentiment, parts of speech analysis, NLP, at the point in time that we actually process the data with Speechmatics, and then applying obviously our application around it. So that first, in real time or in batch, we can obviously derive all those things and push them into either our own analytics platform or third-party analytics, discovery, surveillance applications. But the other thing is it allows us to actually run policy and analyze that content at the moment we process it, and then make a determination whether or not we even want to keep the transcript. But we can run the policies and understand that this interaction contained topics around a customer complaint that pertain to a product or service. It contained issues that potentially, we're concerned about from a money laundering or collusion perspective, whatever it might be. We can get all of that information and feed our own systems or other systems, and then the transcript itself becomes transient. And that then allows companies to make a decision as to, do I keep these transcripts around so that they're searchable, or can I at least derive all of the insight and manage risk necessary without having to keep the transcript? And we actually provide the ability to do both.
Because that was one of my questions, in fact, is are you seeing heads of compliance looking at a voice file and a transcript? And is there a difference in the obligations there? Are you seeing actually, do we want to keep the transcript? Does that actually give us more risk? Should we just keep, or do you keep it for a short period of time? What's your thoughts around that? Are you having those conversations?
Absolutely. And so here in the US, there's an affirmative obligation, obviously, to have a record associated with a lot of these calls, right? And whether it's for trade reconstruction, whether it's for other audio channels that you're obligated to keep a record of the conversation. It doesn't, most of them don't prescribe whether or not you have a transcript of the conversation or the original recording itself. And in fact, you would probably argue that the original recording is probably the true record that you would want to keep anyways. The question is, do I want to enhance that with also having the transcript to make it completely searchable? And in some instances, people do. They want to have that transcript available to quickly do levels of quality assurance, further levels of search and analysis. In other instances, some compliance officers are taking the position that we want to be able to understand what's being said, apply levels of surveillance and supervision on those channels, but not keep a transcript. And it does get to a level of proportionality in obviously in the US and primarily around making these things discoverable. And the easier it is you make things discoverable, then the more likely you are to have to provide that information, or the proportionality test starts to shift a little bit. How that happens and evolves over time is another question, which is the same argument was made 15, 20 years ago around email, right? Email was just then becoming to the point where it was a record, right, that had to be kept and searched and all those things. Do we hold this position that audio doesn't have to be searchable for the next 10 years? Unlikely.
Gotcha. No, and in fact, you've come back to an area of proportionality, which is something I raised earlier in the webinar. How much is that affecting the requirements around the voice then? And you just mentioned
because a number of institutions are still taking the position that they're not going to transcribe and keep the transcript. But again, they are realizing a more sophisticated level of analysis and analytics from the audio channels is necessary than a lot of the current technologies provide. And again, the way we've built and architected the application allows us to support both models.
Which is great. No. So just a couple of questions. We have got questions coming in, so I'm going to get onto those. But one last one that I wanted to, again, goes back into my, I suppose, my history and experience is looking more at that reactive stage with the e-discovery side of things. You know, speaking to some ex-colleagues, there is that understanding that maybe these certain times with the COVID, etc., they're predicting that there will be maybe a surge in litigation out there. Do you see that, and do you think that voice is going to be key into some of those discoveries?
Yeah, there's really, it's going to come in two different forms, right? There's going to be one form which are going to be suits that are related to COVID, and obviously right now there's a significant consternation in the insurance markets in particular, as far as, you know, what level of insurance coverage applies, and whether or not business continuity insurance and things like that apply, you know, in a pandemic. There's going to be a lot of litigation around that. Some will have some levels of audio. A lot of that will be contractual. The secondary piece of this, though, is that traditional pieces of litigation and corporate litigation that you would have increasingly will have audio, because of, instead of necessarily you know, meeting notes and emails back and forth, you're going to have things like this, which are all kinds of webinars, or not so much webinars, but meetings that have been recorded. And those meetings obviously will now be subject to discovery, and that will bring in a lot more audio than had probably been would have been contemplated, you know, 6 months ago.
Great. Okay. So a couple of questions here that you can help me with. I might be jumping on some. One specifically, how are you measuring tone and pitch?
Well, so what's interesting is tone is one of those things that actually may or may not have a level of usefulness, right? And so when we look at a conversation, we're looking at it from many different directions. Like I said, we're looking at it from a sentiment perspective. We're looking at parts of speech analysis. We're looking at particular topics or intent that we can derive from it, particular policies or terms that we're interested in. And really, you have to put all of those things together to get an understanding, as, you know, to use your word, of what that conversation is about, or the topics that are part of that conversation. Looking at any one dimension alone, I think we found is of marginal utility, right? Sentiment alone doesn't mean anything, right? Yeah, it's great. I had a negative conversation. Okay, that's potentially helpful to know, to go listen to something or read something. But what was it about? Why was it negative? What was the issue, right? What's the intent? What were the products that were a problem, the service, or whatever it might be? You have to understand all those things to really have a view of what that conversation was about.
And does that then, you know, looking at that improving those conversations, are you using different techniques to help with, you know, background noise, or maybe some other advances there to enhance maybe some of the recordings, or enhance the metadata?
Well, the metadata, for sure. I mean, we create a tremendous amount of metadata from all of the analysis that we do as we're processing the data, right? And that, again, feeds our analytics or feeds somebody else's. Those things also, though, help to, you know, you were talking about word error rates. You know, if you look at the whole of a conversation, and you're deriving all of the topics and intent, sentiment, all those things together, a word, missing words, even if you're missing 12% or whatever Speechmatics was missing, and again, we still find that Speechmatics is far and away the most accurate and flexible platform available to us. But you start to realize that word error rate means a lot less when you're looking at things across an entire conversation, and you are doing all of those other things with that content.
Gotcha. I've got one here, maybe for me, but I might ask your help. So I wish to create my own FinTech company. How do I go about that with Speechmatics and use Speechmatics technology? You know, from a Speechmatics point of view, we always like to understand what your company is trying to achieve, what your plans are. Obviously, can we help you as part of? We do have a partner program and a partner portal that we will. In fact, we'll send more information out soon, and more press releases and details about. But what's important there is what are you looking to achieve? Because a lot of the time we may have these conversations, and actually it's better for you to engage with our partners, such as a Soho squared. So again, a lot of the time we like to have a conversation, understand what your business, what you're trying to achieve, and then we can look at the best way to help you there. George, being someone that's actually one of our partners, and you looked at the technology out there, how did you find, becoming a partner of Speechmatics, and was there any challenges there that we've been able to help with? What's your thoughts?
Obviously, the Speechmatics team has been great, and they've been great to work with. Just to everybody we work with at Speechmatics is great. If I had any advice to give anybody trying to start a quote FinTech company or RegTech company, is don't underestimate the complexity of the domain knowledge that you also have to have. So Speechmatics is going to deliver some of the great technology that obviously underlies what we're doing on the audio channels. But you really have to have a good sense for how is all of this going to actually work in the context of wherever you're going to go deploy this. And having the domain and legal or regulatory background is certainly going to be helpful if you want to get into the RegTech space.
Great. Here's a question that we've got. So the first one, I ran a call through Speechmatics once and the transcription quality wasn't great. That's not great here. It was bad quality call center audio. I used some audio software to scrub the static out of the call, ran it through Speechmatics again. The results still weren't great. Are there any techniques one can use to clear up the audio before transcription?
There are, and I'm not sure which ones were applied here. I would say a couple things. One of the trends we're definitely seeing with our clients is looking at different capture techniques. Remember, the original reason that so many of the call recordings were terrible was because they were intentionally created to be terrible. And by that, I mean, they were captured at very low bit rates. They were captured segregated in multiple files to keep them super small because they were trying to keep things small from a storage perspective. And the legacy vendors and the technology purposely did that. They purposely degraded the call recordings for that purpose, or for the purpose that they would have a high fidelity recording, but then only allow any third parties to have garbage recordings. And that was an intentional business decision they were making. Our clients that we're working with now have realized that they've got to start from upstream and start working with getting better call fidelity and call recordings or voice and audio recordings. The second thing is, as you see in the more interactions that we're having in collaboration systems like this and like I'm sure people use every day in Zoom or Teams or whatever, the fidelity is much higher than you get in those old calls or the cell phone calls necessarily going into a call center that again are degraded. So we can definitely talk about that all day. I think that we're looking forward and working with clients trying to get better at capture technology as well.
We got one around here, multiple language. How are you managing language detection, and are you seeing that being a big requirement?
Absolutely.
So languages
yeah, language was a big reason we picked Speechmatics in language in really two dimensions. One is the global English is great because obviously still a huge amount of businesses transacted in English globally. The fact that somebody in the Gulf region or from Australia or even here in the Midwest US can also be understood like somebody from Wales is great. And so that's excellent. But yeah, so we do a couple things. So there's speech detection that we have applied within kind of our stack, leveraging Speechmatics. And we also then actually have the ability, if we have a sense based on we have language detection that runs downstream in our analytics as well. So if we start to pick up in our downstream analytics that, hey, there's Arabic here or there's German here in these transcripts, then we can also go back and then update our templates that basically define how we process the data to include those models.
Great. Okay, I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions that we're getting in here. Real time or batch? Are you seeing a growth in either?
It's a need for both. The real-time piece is interesting. Tom mentioned a use case, which is, call center agents. First of all, if you're a service center, even financial advisors, call centers, turnover is pretty high in a lot of those industries. And so they are managing these scripts, and they have all these buttons they have to push. And we actually have a real-time agent assist or real-time advisor assist that listens in real time, is creating and driving a transcript. But more importantly, it's actually then surfacing through our search technologies. If somebody's talking about closing an account or opening an account or lowering a mortgage rate or need a deferment on a mortgage, as those terms and as those concepts are being derived, we're actually then prompting the agent with the content that they need instead of them trying to figure out what script applies. And we're automatically hitting those quote buttons, if you will. Did I introduce myself? Did I authenticate this account? Did I ask these 4 questions? All of that's happening automatically so that the agent can focus on just listening and talking to their client as opposed to trying to hit all these different buttons and look through all these different scripts.
Great. So numerical redaction is pretty easy to do, clearly with numbers being fairly easy to identify. Are there any advancements in automatically redacting, say, first line of address or postcode or other such things?
Yeah, and so we do automatic redaction, and to your point, things like social security number, NIH numbers, those are pretty, they're not easy, by the way. They're more straightforward. But yeah, so because we do entity analysis and entity extraction, at the time we're actually doing the transcription, whether again we keep the transcript or not, obviously it makes sense. It's important if we keep the transcript to be able to do that. Location is an entity that can be actually either redacted completely, or we can just derive the locale. Like say we always want to know like the state and a zip code, or a state and a city, for our own information, but everything else we don't need, and we can just keep those.
Great. Well, with George, we are running up against the hour now, and I want to take this opportunity, really thank you for spending some time with me and on the webinar. Anything you wanted to end with, George, before we finish?
No, it's been great. Good seeing you again, Tom, remotely, and no, appreciate the opportunity. This has been great.
Now, I just want to say thank you, everyone, for joining us. Really appreciate it. Hopefully have more webinars, and we'll cover more topics, and hopefully I can drag George onto more of these. But thank you so much. Appreciate your time. We will be in touch, anyone that has contacted us with other questions. But if you need to contact me or the team, please do. My email, tomr@speechmatics.com. Always there to help. Thank you once again. Take care.